Alright, I am back with another video that is going to be sort of publication and zine-centric. This is a selection of a few zines and kind of photo books that a friend of mine sent me, and I was just going to go over them really quick. A lot of them are these right here, these black and white Tour Dogs publications, and this is a publication that's been around for a while, and they publish these sort of limited run zines by various photographers, and they've been doing it for quite a while. They kind of stopped for a year or so, but it seems like they're getting back into it. I was sent a selection of these, and I think they're pretty interesting. I'm not going to go over every one, but the majority of them are black and white, and they just have various photo projects, all sorts of stuff. This is sort of a football game one. There's one here that's kind of a fairly extensive trip to Japan with a lot of more street photography. Things of that nature. These are all black and white, but one of the things that really gets me about them is the layout. You'll notice pretty much every one of them has a lot of two-page spreads. There's not a lot of images that are, you know, cropped down like single-page images or trying to cram a whole bunch of pages onto a single image. Most of them are either full two-page spreads or two-page spreads that have some kind of a leading or a border around the edges that's not huge, but partly there, I think, to kind of keep the photo in its original format and not kind of stretch it out and trim off the top or the edges because of the printing process. And I think that's kind of an important thing that you see a lot in both zines and photo books. And I think a lot of people who are sort of amateur photographers, well, there's one right there that kind of breaks it. There's two images, but both of them are verticals. They're complete page, sort of portrait format vertical images, but they work pretty well together. But then right there you get back to the complete two-page spreads. But anyways, what I was saying is that I think a lot of people who are kind of not familiar with publishing want to cram a lot of photos on pages, and you'd see like one photo here, one here, one here, one here, or you'd see vertical images left and right, probably with some sort of border around it to kind of separate them and make it clear that they're separate images and not somehow assuming they're going to blend together and get confused for one image. And I think that speaks to two things. I think that if you put a lot of images, it kind of shows that you don't really have the confidence or the know-how to cull your images to the best, most concise set, which I think is pretty important. But I also think a lot of people in publishing make the mistake of thinking if they cram a lot of images onto a couple of pages, they're somehow saving money. And I don't think that's really the case. I think you'll often see that it does kind of the opposite. It just makes the images smaller and harder to pick out, and they kind of lose any character and they get lost. And I think that also comes from the fact that there's just too many images, and I think that's kind of doing yourself a disservice. So this book, you can see, does have kind of the borders around it, and I think that one works pretty well. It's not my favorite of the series, but not too bad. Here's the last of the Tour Dogs. Very similar, a lot of two-page spreads, pretty much all black and white. And that's another thing. I think that when you do a zine, you probably, especially early on, or if you're trying to do it on a budget, which I imagine most people are, probably want to try and keep it black and white, because black and white printing is always cheaper than color, and sometimes by a very significant margin. I have this last zine right here from Tour Dogs, and this is a different one. This is called Ill Wind. I think that's, I don't know if that's the name of this particular one of the series, but I know there's a short series that are like these that are different. They're about the same size, but they have a paper cover, where the Tour Dogs have more of a thicker cardstock cover. And they have more color images in them. And the Tour Dogs do sometimes have color, but I think it's only a minority of them that are color, and I think they're usually like a little bit more expensive. They're all pretty cheap, but I think they get a couple dollars more expensive when they're color. These are a little cheaper, but I think they're all pretty much out of publication. And this one has a mix of black and white and color images. But again, you'll see there's a lot of two-page spreads. And even when you do have something like this is one of my favorite spreads. You have two images, but both of them are full-page vertical images, and you have one black and white and one color. And they're both pretty powerful images, I think. And again, there's not a ton of photos. I think this particular book right here has 18 photos, 12 black and white, 6 color, and there's 7 of them that are two-page spreads. So, and that's only out of about a 24-page book. So you could have put more photos in here, but I think this one works a lot better the way it is, being kind of more concise. And that's a brief look at the Tour Dogs, which are a fairly popular zine series. They've been around for a while, and they're not super well known, but they seem to be pretty financially doing okay. I wouldn't say they're hugely successful. Most of these are limited runs of about like 200 or 300 zines. But my understanding is they do pay the photographers a little bit if you get published in them. I don't think it's a whole lot, but you do get a residual check or two if your stuff sells pretty well. So that's kind of nice that they're not just publishing, but they're kind of paying them back. And I know they recently published a book by a fairly well-known photographer, and it sold out within a couple of days. So it's kind of interesting to see them doing that. This is another one. This is a photo book, or you could call it a zine or a book. I guess it's technically more of a zine, but this was created by a small photo collective, and a friend of mine is in it. It's a little bit different. It has a lot of color photos, but there's also black and white photos. You can see you get a 2-page spread. This one has a lot more images that are kind of placed on a page with a lot of white space, and it also has some images that like this one, where you have one page with an image and one page that's blank for kind of punctuation and organization to some extent, I think. This is a selection of photos from 5 photographers, and from what I understand, they got together and basically they selected all the images, but pretty much did the layout in an afternoon. And while it is interesting, I like this, and I know at least one of the people in here, so I won't say anything really negative about it. But I do feel that some of these blank pages and some of these images that are a single page image that are kind of cropped down are not particularly impactful, especially when you compare them to some of the really powerful images like this that are like 2-page spreads that look really cool. And again, the mixture of black and white and color is kind of inevitable when you have different photographers. Then you have some that's more scenery type photos, and some that are more kind of like street photography. There's I mean, that's pretty much it, but it is interesting because it's different. I've never seen a book quite like this. You don't see too many collectives or groups making a book or a zine together. I know there's some who do it, but you just don't seem to see it that much. And I think it is interesting, but I imagine with a book like this with 5 people involved, a lot of compromises were made, and something, if there were fewer people involved, or if they had more time to plan, it might have come out a little better. Because I mean, even looking at the cover, it's got, like, you know, it's got some nice text, got this just kind of blue cover, kind of intriguing, but I think it would have been nice if there was some sort of graphic on it, or at least one photo, like maybe even cropping in and just showing like part of one photo. But this is a 44-page book. It has, I think there's about 34 total images, and one text page that has some information on mainly the collective itself, as the names of the photographers, but not a lot of, it doesn't even have contact information, just their names, which I thought was kind of interesting. And there's not really any distinction of whose photo is whose. You kind of have to guess. I mean, there's certain hints by like the black and white versus color and everything. But I do find that kind of interesting, that looking at it, you don't really know whose photo is whose. So if you were interested in it, you might have to kind of like contact the collective and try to find out who did what, and maybe learn more about it, which is kind of interesting. I think for a collective, that's kind of a good thing to do, but at the same time, I could imagine some individual photographers not really liking that idea and thinking that they're kind of selling themselves short. But again, this had about 34 total images and one text page. I don't know if I did a count to see black and white versus color. There's more color than black and white, I know. And there's 5 2-page spreads in there, which is something I'll kind of come back to and mention, because I think those are powerful images and probably one of the better things to use in a zine. I wouldn't rely on it too much, but I do think there is a lot of power to zines that have a lot of large images and standalone images, kind of in 2-page spreads and stuff like that. Lastly, I've got them kind of wrapped in plastic. I have these last 2 that were sent as well. This was made by a photographer out of Mexico, I believe, and I think it was published in Mexico, and it's part of a small series, but this is the only one I have. It's got this really cool binding where it has these staples that kind of stick out. I've never really seen that before. My one complaint is the cover is, the paper and the printing is kind of fragile, and it got some moisture on it. There's little moisture marks. But he's got some really interesting paper. It's almost like construction paper. You got a text page, which is all in Spanish, so can't really read it very well. And he's got a lot of images in here, most of which are, he has some 2-page spreads, but a lot of them are these vertical single-page images, which I really like. And he's got sort of a film look. There's some black and white, but mostly color. And they have a very vintage look to them, very unique. And then you have, I think that's the number of how many were in the edition and sort of some copyright information in the back. But it's a very interesting book. You do have a few 2-page spreads, not too many, but there's a few in here. And I would say for this particular book, it works pretty well. A lot of the photos were vertical, and I think when they looked at this, they understood that that was a good way to publish them. I don't know if that was something that came about during the publishing process or during shooting, but I do think it is a pretty good way to display things. And even this, when they have like one vertical and one kind of standard landscape, they kind of spread it over the page. That's something I kind of like. I wouldn't necessarily do that a whole lot myself, but I think that can be a useful way to kind of parcel out images in a publication, because you're always working with limitations, page limitations, cost limitations, material limitations. There's always some sort of limitation, and I think that's a good way to kind of work around them. So that's a pretty interesting one. And this last one, I believe, I don't have a lot of details, but it's kind of related to this turf one, and it's, I believe, 2 women made the photos in here and had it kind of published locally. And I know at least one of them was featured in here, because if you pay attention, you'll see some similar images. But I mean, some of the images from here were in some of the Tour Dog zines as well, if you really dug through them. I don't think I showed it, but that is true. These were all on film. There's a lot of double exposures. There's some sort of like poems interspersed throughout. I really don't like that. Maybe I'm just being kind of an asshole, but I always find that a little bit pretentious, and I read them a lot of times and try to think about it, and I'm often like, I don't really see the connection here. But you have a decent selection of images. Again, they skip some pages, which I'm not a huge fan of. I feel like it might have kind of worked better if there were maybe a few blank pages here and there, but you know, you have some kind of back-to-back that is not something I would have done. And like, you have the one spread here where it just barely intersects. I probably would have gone a little bit bigger, or maybe even done a full 2-page spread there. You see kind of the same thing again there. That's not something I would not do it like this. I would say if you're going to do a 2-page spread, you probably need to have about 2/3 of the image on one page and 1/3 on the other, and its orientation should probably be dictated by the composition of the image. And I think it works really well in this one, because you have the dog's head here, and you know, you can kind of cut the body down a little bit. But I would have gone a little further with that one, made it a little bigger, probably left a little more space on this side, because there's no margin. It goes right to the edge. I probably would have left a small margin there, made the image a little bigger, and slid it over a little bit, because looking at that, you could almost assume it was some sort of error with either printing or possibly the layout, something just not being calibrated quite right. So I personally wouldn't have done them quite like this. That one works fairly well, but again, I think I would have made that a full 2-page spread. And that one works quite well when you have just kind of a single standalone portrait vertical type image. And I think that one works well. This one is being so center focused, I don't think it really would have worked well as a 2-page spread. So that's a great example of a single page image. And it has a blank page over here, because this is a pretty interesting and powerful image. The composition is very, very straightforward and kind of in your face. It's got a lot of the leading lines. It's got the smoke, and you can kind of see the fire of a car. It's kind of a dramatic image, but it's very well composed. And I think that works great as a standalone 1-page image. But all in all, that's a pretty interesting one. I really like the cover, and the overall, like, the print quality is quite nice. Again, not a big fan of the poems, and I probably would have done a few things different with some of the formatting, but it's a very interesting little zine, and I don't know, I kind of like it. I like all of them. I don't know if I had to pick a favorite. It's tough. I like this one a lot, and I like this one quite a bit. I always liked it, but it's grown on me more and more the more I look at it. And then some of the Tour Dogs were quite nice. There was one that was very, I can't remember which one it was now, but yeah, they're all pretty nice. But I think it was this one. It was probably, this was probably my favorite out of the Tour Dogs ones. This reminds me of a lot of my stuff. But it's a tough call. They're all very nice, but I like them, and I feel like I've learned a lot from looking at them, because in the past, I've been kind of hesitant to make images 2-page spreads, because I'm always afraid that somehow you're going to lose a lot in the sort of central spinal fold point. And sometimes you do in certain images, but I guess that's where you just kind of have to know about publishing and kind of know about your style and photography. Most of these work very well as 2-page spreads. Like that one was just about perfect. So I think it just kind of depends on what you've shot and how you want to display it. Because if you have, most zines are like this vertical format. If you have more of a book that has more of a horizontal format like that, where it's wider, which most photo books are, I would probably do a lot more single-page images that are kind of a landscape format. And I probably wouldn't do as many 2-page spreads because you'd need almost a panoramic image to really fill it out. Of course, with a book like that, the book is probably going to be larger in itself. So you just have, you have a lot more to work with, so to speak. But that's just something I've kind of seen from looking over these zines. This is pretty much all of them I have here. I have a few other things I might go over in a future video, but I just thought this was very interesting. I really had a fun time looking through these. I got them all at the same time, and I kind of parceled them out and studied them one at a time, and I didn't even look at, there's a couple of them I didn't even look at until I'd had it for like 2 or 3 days. So this kept me entertained for a while, and I feel like I learned quite a bit about sort of zine formatting, and even just modern photography. I don't really spend a lot of time on Instagram, but I feel like all these people are very competent photographers, and they're doing interesting stuff. There's a lot more people shooting on film than I would have thought, and there's a lot more people doing sort of small-scale projects that aren't getting a lot of recognition than I would have thought, which is kind of a shame, but it is very interesting, and I would definitely suggest checking out Tour Dogs. You can buy an annual subscription, which is relatively cheap, and they send you a zine every, I think it's every month, it might be every other month, but you don't pay a lot for them when you get the subscription. And I'm thinking of doing that because it looks like they're kind of kicking things back into full steam, and they're going to start publishing again at a much faster rate. But I really enjoyed this, and yeah, hopefully you guys learned something. I'll try to come back later with a little bit more on zine publication and formatting. I just think one of the first steps in creating a zine is kind of knowing what's out there, looking at them, understanding what kind of options you have, understanding what kind of trends there are, and just learning from it, picking things up, and putting stuff in your pocket, so to speak, so you can use it for later. So hopefully that was interesting, and I'll try to follow this up in a week or so with another video. Till then, stay cool.